Hi, I'm Jeff Cunningham, professor at Arizona State University, and I'm here this morning with legendary investor, philosopher, and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett. Good morning, Warren.
Good morning.
My first question for you, I don't know if you've had a chance to Google yourself, but if you Google Warren Buffett, you get 25 million hits. And my question is, you're a sitting CEO, you're wealthier than Midas, but everybody thinks you're a champ. How do you do that?
Well, I don't know about that. I think when you get older, they forgive a lot of things. So I think if I ever make it up to George Burns' age or something, and I just have a cigar in my mouth, and people will really love me then.
You're arguably the most interviewed CEO in history. Is it your ability to communicate that comes from instinct, or is it something you've learned over the years?
Well, I certainly learned to speak in public at one time. I was terrified of speaking in public when I was in high school. I avoided any class that would require it, and in college. And then I finally signed up for a Dale Carnegie course. When I got out of school, I realized I had to talk to people, and I spent $100. I got this little diploma. I proposed to my wife during the term of the course, so I really got my money's worth there. But in terms of public speaking, I really had to force myself on that. In terms of talking privately, they couldn't stop me from the moment I started in school or anything. I've always liked to talk.
How do you keep up with all the media and information that goes on in our crazy world and in your world of Berkshire Hathaway? What's your media routine?
I just read and read and read. I probably read 5 to 6 hours a day. I don't read as fast now as when I was younger, but I read 5 daily newspapers. I read a fair number of magazines. I read 10Ks, I read annual reports, and I read a lot of other things too. So I've always enjoyed reading. I love reading biographies, for example.
And you process information very quickly.
Well, I have some filters in my mind. So if somebody calls me about an investment in a business or an investment in securities, I usually know in 2 or 3 minutes whether I have an interest. And I don't waste any time with the ones in which I don't have an interest. I always worry a little bit about even appearing rude, because I can tell very, very, very quickly whether it's going to be something that's will lead to something, or whether it's just a half an hour, an hour, or 2 hours of chatter.
When I think you wrote in an annual report, it was in 2009, speaking about the country, about the economy, we are certain, for example, that the economy will be in shambles throughout this year. The problem was that wasn't the complete quote. It led the impression that you were unduly pessimistic about the country. How did you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I wasn't at all pessimistic about the country. In fact, I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times in October of 2008, just when the world was kind of falling apart. And I said the world is going to fall apart for a while, but don't worry about it. We're going to come out fine on the other side. And I said, buy stocks. And I've never been pessimistic about the United States. I bought my first stock in the spring of 1942. I was 11, and if you remember, you don't remember. No one watching this will remember. But we were losing the war at that time, and we were getting totally creamed in the South Pacific, and the Philippines fell, and the Death March at Bataan, and all of that sort of thing. It was not until the Battle of Midway, which was a little later, that things started turning around. But I was optimistic on the country then, and I've been optimistic on the country ever since. And incidentally, the Dow Jones average then was 117,000 now. No one has ever been a success betting against America since 1776, and they're not going to be a success in the future doing it either.
I know when the Dow hit 1,000, it was a moment of euphoria. Yet, if I'm not mistaken, you plowed in and you even raised more funds. Has the Dow ever felt to you like it was way too frothy?
There were a couple of times when it looked too frothy to me, but that's in 50 years. And I gave a talk in 1999, and it's gotten reprinted in Fortune subsequently. And there have been a couple of times when it really looked to me like people had gotten too excited. But even then, I knew that the country would, any marker that we'd established, we were going to surpass later on. And that continues true to today. I mean, this country's just getting started.
I was reading a Lincoln quote the other day. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And of course, he was talking about what led to the Emancipation Proclamation. When I think about your world, 330,000 people who are employees of Berkshire Hathaway or its subsidiaries, how do you send a message that they are being scrutinized under the microscope by the media at all times?
Well, I send a message to their managers. Those 330,000 people work for maybe 70 or so CEOs, and in turn work for me. So my job is to have those 70 CEOs sending out the right message. So every 2 years, I write them a very simple letter. It's a page and a half. I don't believe in 200-page manuals, because if you put out a 200-page manual, everybody's looking for loopholes, basically. But page and a half, it's very hard for them to argue about what I'm talking about. So I tell them, that my reputation, Berkshire's reputation, is in their hands. And not only, and we've got all the money we need. We'd like to make more money, but we got all the money we need. We don't have an ounce of reputation beyond what we need, and we can't afford to lose it. So we never will trade reputation away for money. And they're the ones that are the guardians of that, and that I want them to not only do what's legal, obviously, but I want them to judge every action by how it would appear on the front page of their local paper, written by a smart but semi-unfriendly reporter, who really understood it, to be read by their family, their neighbors, their friends, and it has to pass that test as well. And I tell them I don't want anything around the lines. I tell them there's plenty of money to be made in the center of the court, and I'm 84 and my eyes aren't that good anymore. I can't quite see the lines that well. So just keep it in the center of the court, and if they have any questions, call me.
Even the occasional dust-up at Berkshire
There will be.
is big news.
Yeah.
And I'll pick on Solomon only because it's history now,
Yeah,
and
it's a good one.
a lot of time to reflect on that. When you think about what you went through there, what advice do you have for a CEO who's on the media hot seat because of a similar situation?
Well, there's a couple pieces of advice on that. The first is that when you find out a bad news, correct it, and if it's necessary to report it, then the authorities report it immediately. The big problem with Solomon was not what a fellow named Mosier did, which was to defy the U.S. government, not ever a very good idea, but that could have been handled. But he reported it, he didn't report it. John Merriweather, his supervisor, picked up on it in late April of 1991 and went to the president and the chairman and the chief legal counsel of Solomon and said, here's what this fellow Mosier's been doing. And they all agreed it was wrong. They all agreed it was reportable to the Federal Reserve promptly. And unfortunately, nobody did anything. And then in the middle of May, Mosier went out and did it again. And now you got a terrible problem, because you knew the guy was a bad actor a few weeks earlier, and you hadn't reported it, and now that compounded there, and then you're in a real pickle. So when you find bad news, I say get it right, get it fast, get it out, get it over, and get it right is important. There wasn't any question that Mosier had done it there, but to get it fast and get it out, they missed on. And so deal with you're going to get bad news. I mean, I got 330,000 people. I mean, I will guarantee you that probably dozens of them are doing something wrong right now, and I just hope I find out about it early, and the person below me finds out and lets me know if it's bad enough, and that they stop it. So you can't have a city of 330,000 without an occasional crime of some sort. So it's going to happen, and you've got to do something about it fast when it does happen.
I know you're acquainted with the concept that journalists write the headlines before they do the story. What's your advice for this situation? For instance, Walmart pays fewer than 6,000 of its 1.3 million employees the minimum wage. But the headline is, unions decry minimum wage policies at Walmart. How do you solve that?
It's very tough, because it's a better story from the standpoint of the writer, and particularly the headline writer. The second story is a better story than the first story. And the biggest sin in journalism that I see, and I think, incidentally, I think I probably, as a CEO, have spent more time talking to journalists than perhaps any CEO in the country. Partly that's because I'm 84, but partly because I like to talk to journalists too. But the greatest sin they commit, you've got to start a story with a hypothesis. I mean, you're looking into something because you have a working hypothesis, but you have to give up that hypothesis if it turns out not to be correct, or if it's misleading in a major way. So I always worry about the journalist that calls me. They've decided what story they're working on, and all they're looking for is confirmatory evidence. So I call it quote shopping. They'll talk to me for 45 minutes hoping they get one quote that confirms their story, and ignoring the other 43 minutes when I tell them things that should limit the story. So it's very natural. You get time invested in it. You've got this working hypothesis. terrible what Walmart does with their employees or whatever it may be. And you may have some people who have an interest in it feeding you a lot of material along that line. And once you've invested a lot of hours and your editor knows you've invested a lot of hours, maybe it was the editor's working hypothesis to start with. Now you got to go back and tell him he's wrong or her. I mean, there's a lot of momentum toward a bad story. There's a lot of momentum toward a good story too. But you have to be able as a writer to say, my hypothesis is no longer correct. And all it was a hypothesis. That's no sin to say that, but it's hard to do.
You're referring to what almost feels like ego on the part of the journalist, but there's also the question of an anti-business bias. And I'll just pick on a headline. Billions of penalties later, Diamond, the chairman of JP Morgan, gets a raise. But the truth was that there were billions of penalties, there were fines, there were cuts in salary, the company was turned around, and the salary was restored. Is that too much to ask of a headline writer?
Well, I always worry about the headline writers. Of course, the reporter always says, well, I don't write the headlines. And I ask reporters occasionally, I say, you may not write the headline, but before the story runs, you should at least be okay with the headline. I want you to be able to tell me after the story runs that you were okay with the headline, because the headline is what 10 times as many people are going to carry around in their mind later on as the story. So don't tell me you're absolved of everything because you don't write the headlines. And good reporters will do that, incidentally.